continuing a conversation on interviewing and how to do this effectively to get useful data or what qualitative researchers might describe as authentic data, right? Data that captures the full range and all the perspectives that are relevant to a particular question or topic. I think it's worth spending a little bit of time talking about how to conduct effective interviews. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying is maybe obvious or intuitive for people who have good social skills, yet the qualitative methods research is full of this sort of advice suggesting that maybe not everybody has some of these natural people skills. So to begin with, you should foster a polite, non-threatening persona if you're interviewing people. That seems obvious. You want people to talk with you, so you try to be a friendly person, but pay attention to verbal and nonverbal cues, pay attention to cultural cues. You might try mirroring people. So if they're sitting back, you sit back. If they're sitting forward, you sit forward. Those kind of things can help to create a subconscious bond with folks. Being aware of sort of the cultural context you're operating in. Does it make sense to have coffee? Does it make sense to do something else to sort of create an environment which a person feels reasonably comfortable and willing to share and talk? We should stress that we're interested in the person as a person. It doesn't hurt to butter people up a little bit and explain to them why their perspective is valuable, why you are interested in talking with them, and getting what they think and their insights into things. And you might also want to add into there that you're not looking for a right or wrong answer. You're interested in legitimately their perspective, because people sometimes, when they're, particularly if they're not really sure what this whole interview thing is about, will try to be helpful, and they think being helpful means giving you the answer that you're looking for, when really the answer that you're looking for is their honest perspective on things. I might also add that being respectful of a person or showing your interest in them also means using their time effectively, right? So you come prepared, you show up on time, all those sorts of sort of professional things are other ways, subtle ways of signaling that I'm caring about getting the most out of this experience, and I'm taking it seriously. If possible, build a personal link with people. So that might mean spending some time talking about shared hobbies or interests. It might be, if you had a referral, to talk about your common acquaintance, the person who helped set up that meeting. If you have a common experience. In the Midwest, we like to talk about the weather a lot. That's our sort of go-to discussion point when we're trying to sort of work our way through that initial awkwardness of here's a new encounter with a person. We talk about the weather, and that makes sense because these are really foundational, like how people interact kind of skills. Okay, so assuming that you've sort of put people at ease and kind of got them to a point where they're willing to chat with you, when you start with the interview process, it helps to ask open-ended questions. Obviously, if you're doing a structured interview where it's just like a set questionnaire, that's all you're doing. But if you're doing something more unstructured or semi-structured, start with some open-ended questions, and you might want to preface them with some larger introductions, right? To kind of set the stage, kind of get people thinking, maybe ping a bunch of different things so that their brain sort of latches onto a couple different things and they sort of see a couple different perspectives about what you might be trying to get at. And so start with something that allows them to give more than just a yes or no answer. And if they do offer a yes or no answer, you can follow that up. And that might be, can you tell me more about that? Or that sounds interesting. Could you explain, right? Those follow-up questions that, again, are more open-ended are useful. There's been a lot of qualitative research, or studies of qualitative research that have found that probing strategies matter a lot. So in teacher training or professor training pedagogy courses, there's oftentimes this bit of advice that if students aren't asking questions or if the discussion isn't rolling, the instructor should just stay silent because silence is uncomfortable. People don't like silence. They tend to try to fill that silence by talking, and that's a mechanism to put a little bit of subtle pressure on people to get them to share more than they were necessarily planning to do. I find this a very difficult thing to do, in part because I have a very low tolerance for silence. And so I get uncomfortable way before most other people do. But it is a tactic that one could use. Other folks have researched the effectiveness of encouraging sounds. So these are the, oh yeah, yep, yeah, definitely. Those kind of sounds actually have a pretty powerful effect in encouraging people to elaborate further. In fact, I think there's studies that show it like increases by like 25% the length of the answers that you're going to get from people just by providing affirmation as they're going that you're paying attention and interested and following along. So those could be things that you could consciously employ to try to get a little bit more out of those interviews. Follow-up questions are great, as I mentioned, particularly if you get sort of the yes or no answer at the start. But there's ways to conduct follow-up questions that maybe can help to get a little bit more. So one way is to restate what the person said as a way of showing that you're listening and launching your next follow-up question. So it could be, so what I heard you tell me is da 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 da. That leads me to ask this secondary question. But you can also be strategic, and particularly if you think people are being a little bit guarded, and you kind of have to have a read on the person you're interviewing. But you can choose to restate what the person told you in a way that's just a little bit wrong, and they'll correct you. And in the process of correcting you, it'll sort of ping in their mind, this person's not getting it. I need to go into detail, explain why they missed this particular point. And suddenly they're like going back to something that they might have glossed over a little bit, that there might have been sort of underlying assumptions that they didn't talk through. And now they're sharing those with you because you clearly aren't following. So that can be a strategy, right? You don't want to sort of go wildly off course because that's going to suggest that you weren't paying attention. But those little bit sort of points where you need correction can be a helpful way to kind of get a person to circle back to those points. There's other strategies. One is called baiting the hook. That if you think a person is maybe not being fully candid, you can sort of hear their answer and say, okay, I think I understand. I think I know where you're going. I think I get what you're saying, under the surface. And a sort of implication of you're dancing around the real truth, but I figured it out. I'm in on the circle, or in on the secret. If there is a secret, that might encourage the person to be like, well, this person has already figured it out. There's no point in me holding back. I'll share now. But maybe there's not a secret, in which case they'll be like, no, that's not what I meant. That this is what I'm saying. And either way, you're getting useful information from that conversation. And so there's lots of these little tactics that people use to try to maybe get somebody who's being a little bit reticent to share more, tactics that maybe can help you navigate slightly tricky situations. But I would maybe encourage folks to practice interviewing and build these skills slowly, because interviewing is very much an art form, and doing it well and doing it effectively requires a fairly good read on people and a fairly good handle on social dynamics. I want to flag one last thing that folks who are conducting researchers need to wrestle with, and one of those is, how do you record what you got out of your interview? And there's a variety of different ways that people can do this, right? So I'll start with just nothing at all. Right? You could walk in and have no recording device, no pen and paper, just you're there. If you go that route and somebody says something interesting, you're not going to be able to like write it down word for word, right? If they quote you a number, you may not remember that number. And so that conversation, whatever that conversation was, when it's done, you have to race back home and type it up as fast as you can and hope to heck that your memory is good enough that you can get the relevant details. On the other hand, it can be a little intimidating for somebody to have somebody taking notes or recording what they're saying, particularly if the topic's kind of sensitive. That may not be a desirable thing. You may want to put people at ease, and putting people at ease means that we're having a conversation and I'm focused on you, not on writing things down, that we're having a conversation and there's not a recording device off on the side. And that conversation is a personal conversation rather than a thing that's being tracked and digitized and monitored, because that may put people potentially ill at ease. Handwritten notes are probably better than recording for that, right? Because I can still like put my pencil down very visibly, and you can see when I'm recording things and when I'm not, and I can maintain good eye contact with you when I'm not recording. It's handy for when I'm not writing things down. So handwritten notes can be helpful. I would encourage you, if you do have handwritten notes, particularly if you have terrible handwriting like mine, to also run back home and type things up as quickly as you can after that interview. Don't let them sit for a week. Oftentimes people after interviews are a little exhausted. They can be intense experiences, and so they let these things sit. And I can tell you from experience that you will lose information. Every day that goes by that you let them sit, you'll lose information, and those notes will make less and less sense when you come back to them. You'll still have that number you're able to scribble down, but that's maybe out of context because of time. You can do audio or video recording. And again, I think you can sort of intuit, right? So now we have a solid record of what was said, but people might be a little bit hesitant about that. And as I kind of flagged, that you can have sort of sensitive topics that maybe you don't want a recording. And I went to a qualitative institute back in 2007. And I ran into a researcher who had been conducting field work and interviews in Syria, looking at pro-democracy organizations that were or organizing that was occurring through mosques. This is an incredibly sensitive topic, right? I mean, these are the people that the Assad regime is looking to hunt down and destroy. And he recorded his interviews, and I was just like, how could you possibly have done that? Like, you're putting folks at risk because you have these recordings that have potentially identifiable information, and B, how did you get people to talk when they're talking about something so sensitive and potentially dangerous? And his response was, well, I used my iPod and to do the recording, and iPods were like a new thing. And so he used them as an icebreaker. So he'd sit down with the leadership of a mosque, and he'd say, do you mind if we start with a call to prayer? And so he'd click the iPod, and it would play, a couple calls to prayer, and they'd chat about that. And right, he's building rapport. And then he would say, do you mind if I record this? And suddenly they're in the mindset of, oh, well, the thing that plays the call to prayer couldn't possibly be a threat to my survival. And so they went along with it. They said yes. But he also found that the security within Syria at the time hadn't quite processed through that an iPod could be a recording device, that it was a thing that played music. It was thus a harmless, not to be paid attention to kind of thing. And so whenever he was stopped at a checkpoint and somebody asked, what is this thing? He'd click on and play some music and be like, well, it's my music player, and on he went. I think authoritarian regimes have gotten a little more savvy about electronic recording devices. I wouldn't recommend replicating his particular method of recording and keeping his data secure from an authoritarian regime. But I think it's a useful illustration of some of the potentials and drawbacks, and maybe even ethical questions that can come up when we're thinking as researchers about how we're going to record things and what kind of record we're going to leave.